Hello, everyone. My name is Ned Dennison. I'm the chairperson of the International Marathon Swimming Hall of Fame, and we have with us today Lynne Cox. Lynne, please say hello to everyone.
Hello, everyone.
Lynne is one of the pioneers of open water swimming, and she's known for record-breaking swims, first ever swims, and interestingly, building bridges between countries. She's an honoree of the International Marathon Swimming Hall of Fame and the International Swimming Hall of Fame, and then the only swimmer we know of that with an asteroid named after her. She's also a best-selling author and motivation speaker. Let me give you just a tiny glimpse of her career. The Catalina Channel, she swam at age 14, and she set the speed record for that swim for both men and women at the age of 17 when she swam it the second time. The English Channel, she set the all-round record for the swim, England to France, for men and women in 1972. And again in 1973. I'm not sure I have that date right, 73. She was the first female to swim Cook Strait from the North Island to the South Island in 1975. And in, I think it's her book, Swimming to Antarctica, there's this great section about the country listening on the radio. And as Lynne starts the swim, she starts going backwards for a few hours. It's an incredible section. In 1985, she went around the world and did 12 epic swims in a great bucket list. In 1987, she swam the Bering Strait. She swam from the United States to Soviet Union in water that was 38 degrees Fahrenheit or 3.33 Celsius in 2 hours and 6 minutes. And this literally opened the border between these two superpowers. Presidents Reagan and Gorbachev heralded the swim when they signed the INF Treaty. So really unbelievable things. And then in 2002, she did the first Antarctic mile, actually 1.22 miles, 32 degrees Fahrenheit, 0 Celsius. Perhaps the inspiration for all of the ice swimming going on these days. And then over 40 record-breaking and milestone swims in her career. Her books, Swimming to Antarctica, New York Times bestseller. Grayson, New York Times bestseller and translated into 23 languages. The New York Times bestseller list is a big, big deal for anybody that doesn't know about publishing. Other books, The Open Water Swimming Manual, South with the Sun, Swimming in the Sink, and her first children's book, Elizabeth, Queen of the Sea. And today we're going to talk to her about her 7th book, Tales of Al, the Water Rescue Dog. Who doesn't love dogs, the water, and rescue? Lynne, tell us about the book.
The book is really about dogs and swimming and joy and love and safety. I wound up going to Italy to watch the Italian water rescue dogs train at a school. They invited me to swim with them, to be with them. It was absolutely fantastic. Exactly what you said. You know, who doesn't love swimming and dogs? And those are the two things that I really do love. The coolest thing about this group was that they volunteered their time, they dedicated training, they did hours and hours and hours, just like we do as swimmers or triathletes or athletes in general, where there's working routines that they do. And they were so much fun to watch them because they would wind up having like the novice swimmers, the beginning dogs that were Newfoundlands, Labradors, Golden Retrievers, German Shepherds. They would be the puppies in one end of the pool, but it was really a lake. And then the intermediate swimmers and the advanced swimmers. And what they would do is do training with them every single day from spring all the way through fall in a lake called Lago Iseo. It was a beautiful Italian lake near Milan in northern Italy. But the water was really, really hot. It was about 80 degrees. And so it was what the dogs do with their owners and instructors is they patrol the beaches as lifeguards along the coast of Italy and then also along the lakes. They also go to Switzerland and to Germany sometimes and train. And that whole idea of doing this came about because the starter of the school, Ferruccio Palunga, decided that these dogs had this innate ability, especially the Newfoundlands, to pull fishing lines out of the water. They were bred in Newfoundland. They came as ship's dogs from Spain and Europe to Newfoundland. And then they bred these dogs with great big heads, really powerful. People have asked me, if you have a Newfoundland patrolling the beach with somebody, why can't you just rely on the lifeguard? Because you've got a lifeguard there. Well, sometimes there aren't lifeguards on beaches. And often by having the dog and the other person, there's more eyes on the water. So they prevent a lot of problems from happening. They prevent a lot of drownings. The dogs are alerted to people raising their arms, flashing them up and down. But not all drownings occur because of that. There's what's called silent drownings, and where people or little kids in particular will just suddenly drop off and go under the water and try to keep their heads up by having their arms under the water. So the school really is keyed in on watching the dogs and having them train. And they allowed me to go out and pretend I was drowning. And the funny thing is that they require you, if you went to the school, you would have to put on a life vest. And then, I mean, even with all the stuff you've done, you'd have to swim out there with this huge inflatable vest. And then you do your arm raise and the dog swims out and circles around you, but doesn't come really close. Maybe it's like an arm's length away. And I'm like, why is that? And then what happened with this one particular Newfoundland named Moss, she did this with me, then she circled in closer, and all the time she's watching me, and then she presented the handle on top of her harness. Then she started pulling me to shore, and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm a lot of resistance. It's going to be hard for her. She was so fast and strong. It was amazing because, they have huge paws with the webbing between the paws, and they can just pull and they sort of do a breaststroke. So within, I don't know, 45 seconds at the most, she'd gone 30, 40, 50 yards. I don't know, but it was really quick. So we landed on shore, and is this good to keep telling you all about this? Or am I just babbling on?
No, I'm just thinking, like, if I rescued Lynne Cox, I would have shirts printed up. I would be unbelievably arrogant for the rest of my life. I can imagine this Newfoundland dog strutting around the beach in Italy going, I rescued the famous Lynne Cox.
No, actually, she was just like, let's do it again, okay? Well, you want to do it? Come on, let's go. And so I turned to Ferruccio, the head of the school and the owner of Moss, and I said, hey, could we do this again? And he's like, absolutely. I'm like, okay. So I went out maybe 100 meters this time and then started lifting my arms. She zoomed out there, and because she knew that I was okay with her, she came in closer this time. And then I thought, okay, I'm going to see what happens. We get like 20 meters or so, and I let go. She circled back around me and presented the harness. We got almost to shore, and I let go again. And she circled around me and looked at me like, are you really stupid or what? Hang on. So I held on to the harness as she pulled me in shore. And I just thought, this is incredible, the way they are focused on you, the way they're in tune to you. They know, because a lot of people are afraid of dogs, and a lot of people culturally are told stay away from dogs. So the school was so sensitive to figure out how to make sure the dogs do not add to the fear. And there's also an instructor that follows out there to secure the person. So this was part of the story about the Newfoundland, but they were training all these other dogs, and they were competing with each other, and they were racing each other. And it was like, being on swim team practice.
So when we were kids, we had a black lab, and the black lab didn't circle. The black lab came right into you and scratched the living daylights out of your chest with toenails. And I remember as kids, we started off by like leaping off the pier. It was maybe a few feet, a meter high. And then we got to the point of we would go off about a 10-foot jump, or we'd throw the ball and the dog would absolutely love it. And there was this much higher cliff, and we thought, even as kids, you might not really be responsible, but we used to say, like, if the ball somehow went off that cliff by accident, the dog would be gone. So you had something in your book about the dog leaping from a particularly unusual platform, which I still trying to get my head around.
Well, actually, the way you were training with your Labrador is very similar to what they do. In Italy, the Italian water rescue dogs are trained to leap out of helicopters into the lake. and also Coast Guard boats, but they started off just like you. The dogs first leap off the docks, and then they go to the Zodiac and off the pontoons, and the pontoons there can be higher. So they get up there. And then when they're working with the Italian Coast Guard or with the Italian Air Force, because they also work with them as well, the helicopters are lowered to about 12, maybe 10 feet off the water, and then the dogs leap. And I just, when you see this video on the internet and you look at this and go, how come the dogs aren't afraid? How do they get them into the helicopter? Why do they jump? And they're cued in. It's like, and then the owners have to jump, and it's scary. I mean, it looks frightening to do these things.
I'm just thinking, like, it took about 4 of us to get the dog into the vet's office. It kind of knew the vet's office wasn't a nice place. I just can't imagine trying to get a dog into a helicopter. It must have been a lot of biscuits involved.
No, actually, they are excited. They stand in line waiting for their turn to do this, and they're barking, their tails are wagging, and it's like, okay, go ahead. And you're like, you're going to go to a swim meet, and you're about ready to take off to swim, and you have all your teammates cheering you on. And it's like, they're all eager themselves to do this as well. So that was astonishing, because I also wanted to know, are they forcing these dogs to do this? I mean, you've seen those swim coaches or triathlon coaches or coaches where they're like, they just scold the athlete or yell at them for not doing a certain thing. And there was never any of that. There was always this positive reinforcement. And the key too was that, if I was trying to teach you a certain skill, the dog a certain skill, and the dog got to a certain level and then couldn't get it, they would back down and have the dog do something it could do. So it reinforced success. And then because we're on the same team and you have a dog and I have a dog, we'd swap dogs. And so you might be able to train the dog that I couldn't train. But the other cool thing was that it was like a family or a team where people helped train each other's dogs. But beyond that, just like, when you're in a swim team, if you saw me doing something wrong with my backstroke and you knew how to correct it, you would help me. Well, in Italy, the dogs help each other. So Mas, this really seasoned star performer who was an incredible elite athlete in her own right, was used to try to help Al learn how to become a lifeguard dog. But the frustration is that Al, and the reason I wrote about her was she was reluctant because she was so distracted, because she was so exuberant, because she was like one of those young swimmers that everything in the world is amazing and interesting and she can't focus. So I follow the story of her, but also the other dogs, and then dogs in my life. Like you had the Labrador, I had a yellow Labrador named Cody, who was my best pal. And I adopted him when he was 7 years old, and I had him for 6 years. And we would go swimming off Malibu together. And he had been trained not to scratch me. but I didn't know that. So the first time we went to the beach, he was 7 years old. And I said, do you want to go in the water? And he's like, yeah, sure. So he went out and he just swam right beside me. So I think part of those things were the reason why I was so interested in the story. But also, I just love that people are lifeguards and canine experts and do search and rescue and help other people do all this stuff for the benefit of others, but also to create the bond between themselves and their dogs. It's something really extraordinary.
So when you saw the video, did you think book, or did you think this is really interesting, I want to go see this, and you jumped on a plane to Italy, went to see it, and later book came into your head?
That's exactly what happened. It was actually almost 10 years later, because I went there with the idea just to learn about it, just to see how it was all done. I mean, I'm sure and the people who are listening or watching this right now know that sometimes you just get this idea that's just so inspiring. And other people don't understand. They don't know why you want to swim the Strait of Gibraltar or around the Cape of Good Hope or the Bering Strait, or they don't get it. They don't understand, but you just know you have to do it. So that's exactly what happened with this. I just saw these dogs and I just thought, I'm amazed. I've never seen a 150-pound Newfoundland leaping out of a helicopter into a lake rescuing somebody. I've seen lifeguards. I admire them. My brother and sister were lifeguards on beaches in California. I lifeguarded in pools. You see that and you go, they really are in responsible positions. And these dogs are doing that with their owners. And actually, I have to tell you that I think it was June or July last year, CNN did a story about two Labradors and their owners who were patrolling the coast off of Rome area, the water there out, and there were 14 kids on rubber inflatable rafts that had been sucked out by a current. And one of the kids started waving to shore. The two Labradors and their owners saw what was going on. They swam out and pulled all 14 kids to shore. So it happens where they do this spectacular savings of kids and people, but often it's just preventing stuff from happening.
Yeah, I think for anybody who's ever lifeguarded, one of the things that they teach you is the last thing you do is swim directly up to somebody that thinks they're drowning and touch them, because there's probably a bit of panic. You maybe stop a little ways away and assess the situation. I had a friend who used to go up and just punch him hard once, and that kind of calmed him down, and then he would pull him in. But so the idea that the dog is trained to swim around, calm them down and assess the situation, and then get a little bit closer and present the harness is fascinating, because as a lifeguard, you would do something similar. You might swim out with a tow boy and assess the situation, toss it over to them, and see if they're able to grab it, because the last thing you want to do is have that drowning person's arms around you, not unless you absolutely have to. So fantastic.
And also the owner's there to reassure and be there and is trained to be a lifeguard. So there's this duality. And a lot of people, when you hold on to that harness, it lifts you up. So your head's above water, and the dog's head is sort of down at the water. And at first I was like, oh no, this is going to be really hard for this dog. But the Newfoundlands pull in up to 6 people at a time. Like, how can they do that? And then Labradors are known for 2, Goldens for 2, German Shepherds, and there were Leonbergers. I'd never heard of a Leonberger before. Have you ever heard?
Isn't it kind of a diet hamburger or something?
They were bred because of a town in Germany called Leonberg, and they were made to look like lions. So they have these great big furry chests, and they're bigger than Newfoundlands. They're more rangy, they're longer. And they use these dogs a lot in water rescue in Italy, but they use them in the United States a lot. And also, here in the United States, they've started programs where they're used as assistance dogs, but because of what happened in Italy, the Newfoundland Club of America and the Newfoundland Club of Canada have their own water trials for dogs, and they do the tests, and they also do water rescues. So if people are really interested in that, they can connect those two with these 2 different groups. Their training is different than what's done in Italy, but it is really still very cool.
So the dogs they're not owned centrally. They have individual owners. And then they provide a service to municipalities or beaches or coastlines.
Right, exactly. And Donatella Pasquale was the vice president of the school. And so she was one of the key instructors in all this. And she was pretty much a dog whisperer, except for her own dog. And so that was what it's like the coach's kid, I remember how hard that was for a couple of the teams I was on, where, the coach wants the kid to do a certain thing and the kid just doesn't get it, Actually, I was going to show you a picture. Is that okay? Of the book? So this is a picture of Al. She's right here. She's an unusual Newfoundland. She was a chocolate brown Newfoundland with golden eyes. And here she is at about 12 years old on a stand-up paddleboard. She's still around. She's about 13. She's no longer doing the rescuing. She was until about a year ago. And you can see here is a Labrador that's underwater with its little harness on. So the book's Tales of Al, the Water Rescue Dog, and the makings of an elite athlete, because they train like we do, where we, there were, I think there was somebody that was meeting at the Italian School for Water Rescue Dog. Let's see, Scuola Italiana Carni Salvataggio, where they were working with the dogs and they could swim up to a mile with them in the lake, which was pretty darn good. And the dog was like, this is no problem at all.
I was trying to understand the similarities between some of this and marathon swimming. And so in marathon swimming, you have somebody on the boat that you know and you trust. When I swam Catalina, it was Forrest Nelson. And Forrest's job was to keep me safe. They made the assumption that after X number of hours, I would be a little bit stupid and I would just not know danger. And Forrest's job was to keep me safe. And I remember as a kid with the lab, the most dangerous thing when the lab is when somebody shoots the duck and the duck lands in the water, the lab is gone. But if the duck is only winged, the duck can swim faster than the lab. And the lab will chase this duck for miles until literally the dog drowns. And one of the big trainings on duck hunting dogs is there's a certain whistle which says, come back. Forget the duck, time for you to come back. So I think it's very similar that there's, once the swimmer or the dog is focused on an activity, there needs to be some sort of control. And when I first was reading the reviews of your book, I was wondering if like somebody was throwing a tennis ball out to the person that was drowning and the dog was going out to get the tennis ball, but clearly not. So how long were you in Italy?
It was just 10 days and it was just very, very intense. It was sort of like, being brought into an athletic program to see how it's all done in 10 days. So it was very, very condensed, but I saw amazing things, just like what you're talking about. When does the dog know it's enough? And the thing about they don't play with toys with their dogs. And that was really curious too. So I think that just going to Italy, but also going to Milan, I wrote about this because I thought it was so amazing that Italy, and especially Milan, is seen as the design capital of the world, or one of them. And so because of that, they have that openness of mind to accept new ideas. So when Ferruccio Palenga came up with this idea for the water rescue dog school, and Donatella understood what it all meant, people in that area now throughout Italy embrace it. I mean, these dogs are known throughout the country, throughout Europe, and have been covered in BBC, Japanese television, all over the place because they're exceptional. And I think that was the other reason I was so attracted to writing about them, because they are so exceptional. They've gone from being just a family pet or a friend to doing something really significant. And I really admire that in people, but also, they work in conjunction with the Italian Coast Guard and they patrol with the Italian Coast Guard. And the Italian Coast Guard, like our Coast Guard and Navy people, are always training. So the dogs have to maintain a certain skill level. So they're constantly training and they have to go through certain tests. And if the dogs can't do the tests, then they can't participate. And, it's like, again, you're on a swim team and you got to go to work out. And if you don't do that, then you can't swim in the meets. So I love that, seeing those crossovers, but also the fun, after a big workout or a big competition, what do? You gather together and you eat. And in some cases, if you're with the South End or Dolphin Club, you drink and eat. So in Italy, that was what you did. And it was so fantastic because I wrote a lot about this in a book about the food in Italy and how wonderful it was in Northern Italy and how so much of it was new. And I love the connection that you get when you get together, you debrief, you talk to each other, you relax, and you figure out things you didn't know, or somebody comes up with an idea that's crazier than you even thought of. Yep. You know about that. And then you decide, I got to do that too, Yeah,
we had one of those on Friday. It's our cake morning in Kinsale, Ireland. And there was a particularly strong adverse current right before corner 2 of going around this island. And everybody sat down for the cake and went, what's going on with that current out there? I thought I was never going to make it. And everybody had their own story of the current and how they were racing the immobile rock on the bottom underneath them. And yeah, very similar.
So they could see the rock and couldn't see it moving, or
no, the rock is moving away from you in front of you. That's
okay.
Because you know you need to
Um,
apply a little more stroke work at that point. So Lynn, what was
So,
the, how was the comparison of writing Swimming to Antarctica, which is essentially an autobiography, compared to writing about something new and unusual, the Owl the Rescue Dog?
the Swimming to Antarctica book took me 21 years to get published, and I worked on it every day pretty much for 21 years. It was so frustrating because I really wanted to tell these stories, and the book went through 11 major rewrites. I started writing it my senior year in college, and at that point I called it Beyond Borders because it was about swimming beyond borders, and it was all new and nobody else was doing it. And I just kept working on revising it, doing more swimming, doing more swims, and finally got to a point where my second cousin was Anne Rice. So my other cousin kept saying, give me your book, give me your manuscript, give it to Anne Rice for you. And I'm like, you know what? I don't want to impose, but at that 21-year mark, I'm like, I'm imposing. I'm going to bother her. So she read it a week later, said, I love it. Can I give the book to my editor? So she then gave the book to Vicki Wilson at Knopf. Vicki read it and loved it, but she couldn't get the publisher convinced to publish it. And she asked, could you write more to add to the book? So I added over the course of 2 weeks, I think it was 200 more pages, more swims, more stuff. And then she said, you have to cut that to like 6 pages. So I'm like, okay, the challenge. Okay, now the sprint. What if you only have 6 minutes instead of 60 minutes? What do you tell somebody? So I cut it and just threw the rest out so it wouldn't bother me forever. And then I wound up getting the book almost published, but I said to the editor and to my book agent, Martha Kaplan, I'm planning to do a swim in Antarctica. I'd like to do the first Antarctic mile. And the idea is to add that to the last chapter of the book. And that was what sold it. I just had to work on it for 21 years and swim to Antarctica to be able to get it published. So,
Well, yeah, I think
it was,
for people listening, in the year when that book came out, open water swimming was quite niche. And it's really exploded in the last 10, 15, 20 years. And cold water swimming was, almost unheard of.
right.
And these days it's got a, tremendous amount of publicity and a tremendous amount of interest, and people are lining up to do ice miles and all this other stuff. But at the time, the title Swimming to Antarctica was a catchy title.
Yeah, it was because nobody ever thought about going there. Now people are doing it because it's something really to do. But, for me, it took me years to train to be able to swim in water that cold. I didn't think, okay, in 2 years, I'm going to do this. It was a progression through a long period of time. And even then, when I did the swim, I had 3 doctors on board that I knew from, and also the ship's doctor who was pretty good, but my doctors I had total confidence in. So that was a course of like 30 years before I did the swim in Antarctica. I was progressively doing colder and colder cold swims. But, the thing is, it was about also exploring, why do you do this? It's really to see what you're capable of doing. It's really to see how it can be done. It's really to figure out, the mystery within yourself.
I only did the ice mile because Finbar said I couldn't. That was it. He said Ned's not able to do cold water. He couldn't do this. That was it. I had to do it.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I think it's an amazing challenge, but I think, it's sort of like swimming in general. There's different events. There's so much to do that, there's certain places in the world where you don't want to swim all year long, where you want to go back to the pool and do the other training. But for me, I just love going to new places and finding out from the locals what I need to know and doing research and then doing a swim. I still am super cautious about swimming anywhere without having done background research,
Tell us about your book tour. Where are you going? Are you seeing friends? Are they throwing into a hostile environment in Des Moines, Iowa? What's happening?
I am going to be doing 44 events on this book tour. It started on the 24th of May and will finish on the 10th of July, going up the West Coast of the United States, to one of your favorite places, the South End, but the library in Santa Monica, Santa Cruz, all sorts of places, then down the East Coast, then around the Midwest and Great Lakes, then to the Pacific Northwest, and then down to San Diego area, then to Austria and Switzerland. So it's really an extensive tour. If people really want to find the details, it would be great. It's www.lynne, Lynne, cox.com. And it lists all the events, it lists where I'm going to be, the dates, and already, I was just in La Jolla a couple days ago at the library there, and it was like so much fun. They were all sorts of old friends, and one woman said to me, "Do you remember we stayed with a team at your house when we were competing against your team?" And like we were both like 12 years old then. I'm like, "Oh yeah, I remember." I did remember her. But that was what my parents did. They had swimmers from all around the world always staying with us. With Australian swimmers from Switzerland, and one swimmer from England for an entire year. And then my sisters were both on the US water polo team. So one summer we had pretty much the entire women's water polo team staying at our house. So that just shows you the level of support that my family was involved in sports and in swimming. And then my brother swam the English Channel, and he also swam Catalina, and he held the record from the mainland. No, he held it from the island to the mainland. So it was that kind of a family where we helped each other out. We supported each other. At one point, David, my brother, was coaching David Udovan and me through one summer, which was hysterical because David Udovan was one of the best open water swimmers ever. He did swims that were way beyond what anyone would think of. Cape Verde Islands, the Azore Islands, swims in Indonesia, just places that you would never believe possible. And he and his wife Beth she was his captain so many times and his supporter. And so he did these extraordinary things. He was one of my closest friends, and we used to train together a lot off Seal Beach and then sometimes off Huntington Beach. There was one story that I have to tell you because it's about food, back to food in Italy. It was his birthday, so I made him a chocolate cake, and we did a 10-mile workout on his birthday. He came out and ate the whole cake. When we called it after that, a cake workout.
Well, Lynne, I'm gonna wind up our interview. I would thank you very much. You mentioned the South End Rowing Club in San Francisco. By sheer coincidence, I'm going to be there in about 10 days when you're going to be at the club. So I'm looking forward to that. And I think for people who are starting in open water, one of the great things about open water, I think for you and for me, is when I travel around the world, I always know a few people.
Huh?
So I go to.
I'm sorry.
I go to Perth, Australia. I go to Japan. I go to Hong Kong, and I know some open water swimmers from some other swims somewhere. So hope on your book tour you run into hundreds and thousands of old friends, and you have a great time.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ned, and thanks so much for interviewing me. And I'll show you one more time the book.
Tales of Al,
Thank you.
Water Rescue Dog.